Hello, everyone. We are just welcoming our panel members for the next session. We hope that you enjoyed some of the networking opportunities that we've just had in the last 10, 15 minutes or so. But we're going to have now a discussion with 4 very esteemed guests. And this panel discussion is called Development of Women-Led MSMEs for the Digital Economy. But we basically, I think, want to focus on solutions as much as we can. We all know what the problems are, I think. We will be looking at some of the challenges that my guests today feel are important, but also, how we can move on. We all know the importance of digital in this particular era. It's all been highlighted so much in the last 18 months. Let me just introduce the 4 very impressive women that you can see on your screen today. And Angela Baker is Head of Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at Qualcomm for over 8 years now. Welcome, Angela. Before that, Angela served as an advisor to Hillary Clinton, who, of course, has also been a part of this whole summit. So thank you to Angela for joining us today. Angela Kolb is leading the Gender and Economic Inclusion Department at the IFC, that's the International Finance Corporation, and is very well known to the foundation as a former CEO here, and she helped establish the foundation as an internationally recognized organization. So welcome back, Blair. Fade Ogunro is CEO and founder of bookingsafrica.com, an online gig work marketplace that is currently operating in 3 countries and across the continent of Africa. She's a visionary techpreneur, global campaign board chair, also at the Cherie Blair Foundation. So very welcome to you. Thank you, Fade, for joining us. And Claire Sibthorpe, Head of Digital Inclusion for the Mobile for Development team at the GMSA, where she's worked for over 7 years. Before this, working as a consultant with governments and not-for-profit organisations in the UK and around the world. We're going to be having a discussion with my 4 guests, and then we will be taking questions. So if you're listening and anything that you've heard this morning or anything that comes up in the next few minutes that you'd like to know more about, please do get in touch. Enter them in the chat, and we would love to hear from you, and we'll bring those thoughts in. Just as we start, I'm going to ask each of my guests to start here. I'll start with Angela, just to set the scene really for the discussion. If you could just each for 2 minutes, if you can, just summarize a key barrier and an opportunity for the whole digital space for women, how you see the stereotypes that we've seen researched by the foundation affecting that now, right in 2021. Angela.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I think I'm sure everybody's going to speak to lots of different things, but given what we've seen at Qualcomm and looking at how we're, leveraging mobile and 5G, right, for women's entrepreneurship globally, I think certainly the pandemic has been very tough on women. And I know we've heard a lot about it over the last few days, specifically women entrepreneurs, given what's been, expected of them at home, what technology barriers they might have that have been sort of amplified with the pandemic. And so I think the real opportunity here is that, I think technologies will continue to be a game changer for women, and as we sort of start to come out of the pandemic and as new technologies become available, things like 5G, how that's going to let more women in rural areas, more sort of last mile folks get connected and be able to create their businesses or whatever, grow their business, trillions. Can you hear me?
We can. You're slightly breaking up, unfortunately, but if you just give us the end of that sentence, then we'll move on to Claire. Claire and see whether see whether we can reestablish the line.
Okay.
Sorry. Carry on.
No, I was finished. Great. I just said we think technologies are going to have a huge impact for women as we're coming out of the pandemic, and the potential for 5G is going to be incredible.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about that, but I think we got certainly got the gist of what you were saying. Henrietta, let me bring you in. What do you think sort of the key barriers are right now, key opportunity as well?
Thank you so much, Geeta, and good morning or good afternoon to all of you. I'm talking to you here from Washington, D.C., so it's a little earlier than in the UK. And thanks for having me to discuss this important topic and how we can leverage innovation to make sure that all genders have access to the opportunities that come with it. And the one, I think, hope that was sort of crushed, I think, for us, talking from a banking perspective, was that digital was supposed to close the access to finance gap. Finally can crack that really complicated nut and close gaps in access to finance. Now, unfortunately, 10 years later, we've all been digitally engaged, or not all, but a good number of us, and yet it is very clear that actually the digital finance gap has not been closed and has not allowed us to leapfrog women into having full access to bank accounts, insuring products, housing finance, and so on. So the opportunity I see is to really look at platforms which are increasingly also providing embedded financing, and to ideally enable them to look for alternative collateral and metrics that will predict whether women and men are able to repay their loans. And we've seen some bits and pieces in terms of experimentation, looking at, transactions and seeing how predictable we could use the past transactions on e-commerce platforms to then lend on the financing side. But this has been very experimental and not really done at scale. And we also need to get data privacy right in that respect, and obviously consumer protection. So there's a lot of things that still need to be worked out, but hopefully in future we get the chance to look at past transactions and past online trading and really see them as a predictor to payback of loans, and using them as alternative collateral mechanisms. So I have a lot of hopes. The glass is half full, but certainly just sitting back and thinking digital will resolve all inequity issues has proven us deadly wrong during the pandemic, when we tried to learn, eat, and trade and finance online. And we've seen that really just includes the tip of the iceberg of the population, and certainly not includes women in all parts of the world. Back to you, Geeta.
Thank you so much, Henrietta. And again, before we get into the detail, I'm just asking for a quick overview from all our guests. Fadi, what is your sense of a key barrier, key opportunity, given the stereotypes that are clearly received by the majority of women out there?
Thanks, Geeta. First of all, thanks for having me on the panel. It's an honor to be here, and I'm willing and I'm looking forward to learning from everyone. From my perspective with Brookings Africa, the data in Africa is quite different to everywhere else across the globe or across developed countries. Digital literacy, first of all, is the beginning stages of actually playing any part in any digital economy. If you don't have access to a smartphone, if you don't have access to data or Wi-Fi because you have to choose between food and data costs, then there's definitely going to be a massive divide, not just for women, but for generally the continent as a whole. So for me, the biggest barrier that I've been facing in my business to really scale the business is actually moving low-income women into the digital economy full stop, by giving them access to digital literacy. So the opportunities here that I've identified is a lot of companies actually coming together, creating their own CSR and training women for free, or just training users for free on digital literacy. And I also see a gap where telecommunications companies, banks, and other private companies like myself could come together and work together to really try and resolve this. So I do have hope for the future, but right now there is a massive digital literacy division that needs to be closed.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you so much for that. We'll doubtless come back to that. And Claire, your opening thoughts on a key barrier, key opportunities in 2021.
Yes, I think I'm going to probably echo a lot of what other people have said. So, I mean, I think we've heard in some of the previous keynotes that, just really the opportunity for digital access, to access an economy, to, getting access to customers, finance, how digital is really a gateway, how connectivity is a gateway. But the key barrier is the lack of access. So, there are 234 million women in low and middle income countries who are not using the internet. And I think it does link to the kind of social norms and gender stereotypes, because women are facing the same barriers as men. The top barriers are literacy and affordability, particularly of handsets. there's other issues around safety and security, relevant content and services. But they face these barriers disproportionately more than men. And that's because of the sort of social norms and structural inequalities between men and women, or particularly on income and education, that are affecting it. And we looked just to kind of touch a bit more on this being a woman made a difference, and it did. If we found that if women had the same level of education, income, literacy, and employment as men, there's still a gender gap in digital inclusion. So that shows that these sort of gender stereotypes and social norms really do have a role to play and are driving this divide, which I think is the key barrier and a barrier that we really need to address if we're not going to kind of exacerbate some of these existing inequalities and really drive gender equality.
That's really interesting, Claire. Just very quickly, just to follow up on that, did you look at why there was that gap?
Well, yeah. So I say the top barriers are sort of lack of literacy and digital skills and affordability, particularly handsets. And then social norms and these sort of restrictive social norms underpins it and means that women feel these more. Other key issues that have been emerging are things like safety and security concerns. Again, as more women get online, some of these other barriers play, but the top barriers still remain affordability and digital skills, but underpinned by social norms.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Thank you so much, Fadi. Let me go into a bit more depth with all our guests today. What drew you originally to running a digital business? Where did you get the idea, and why in this space?
Right. So I actually own a TV production company across sub-Saharan Africa, and I used to shoot a lot of commercials for telcos, GE, banks, and I used to film across sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm naturally solution driven, and sourcing talent, reliable, skilled talent in an efficient, cost-effective manner just was pretty much impossible. And I just thought, rather than complain about this fragmented continent, what can I do about it? And literally, I just found out after doing a lot of research, I just thought, actually, going into a digital business, creating an online marketplace that allows women to put up their own price, so people are no longer haggling. You can show off your skill sets. And you can also put your availability. So even if you're a mother and you can only work in the evenings or on the weekends, whatever time suits you, because a lot of the workers a lot of jobs across Africa is actually from informal work. So I thought, how can I actually play a part in formalizing this informal workers that we have? So I'm able to give them access to more jobs and create a platform where they have self-sustainable, dignified work. And for me, the solution was a digital business, an online platform called Bookings Africa, where you can book Africans simply.
Did you, did you face barriers yourself when you were setting this up?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I have to say I'm a non-techie in the tech space. So a lot of people, first of all, personally, would always kind of discourage me. You don't even know the password to your Facebook, Fadi. What are you doing? How can you create a tech platform? So there was that. And also, because I've come from a media background, a lot of people just for some reason thought that I wouldn't be solution driven. Just thought that I would not be able to come up with solutions for complex problems, which was a little bit reductionist. But I've also grown up with my mum, who's so strong, and my mum just was always solution driven. She never liked us to complain about problems. She goes, yes, you've identified the problem, but what is the solution? Don't complain about a problem unless you've got at least two options of what the potential solution could be. So I've grown up with that. So even when I was having a lot of backlash and a lot of discouragement, whether it's for my sex or for my capabilities, I just thought, you're just not the right person to believe in my vision, because I know my skill sets, I know my background, I know what I've achieved, and you're just not aware of that. And a lot of people just thought I should settle down, maybe just become a TV presenter or a model. I remember in my production company, when I'm on set, a lot of people would assume that I was a model. And they were always shocked when they found out that I was actually the owner of the business. So I've kind of had that stereotypical barriers against me for a long time. But at the same time, because I'm so used to it, I always like to prove people wrong. So yes, I have had a lot of stereotypical gender barriers, but I always like to encourage younger women, especially, that you feel even better when you're able to overcome that, and people are shocked and surprised at what you can achieve, because being a woman does not mean you can achieve less by any standard. And I just don't understand. I mean, I never grew up like that. I never thought that men or women had different roles. My mom would never allow us to do that. Everybody does the same roles in our household, whether you're cooking, whether you're cleaning, whatever it is, we can all do it because we're humans. And she always used to say, God does not discriminate when he's giving out talent. So don't think you can't show the world your talent, no matter what sex you are.
Some great lessons there. So much of this starts in the home, and as others have commented, it's hard to change the workplace when life at home is still not exactly equally divided. Certainly not in my house, and not yet. I'm sure not yet in many others. Henriette, can I just bring you in, because the IOC has published a report on women in e-commerce, I gather, in Africa and Asia. What are the key findings there?
Thank you. I really loved listening to your background and story, Fadi, because I think what you've just said is really what we've seen play out when we looked at two of the largest e-commerce platforms, so Jumia in Africa and Lazada in Asia, namely that actually disproportionately you had more women online than were in the offline economy, because they could see the opportunity of combining caregiving roles with actually productive and paid roles. We've also seen, which is very encouraging, a lot more occupational transfer, which means that women who wouldn't sell electronics offline are actually in the electronics business online. So really looking at breaking into sectors that pay higher margins. So that's the good news story, is that we've seen quite a lot of successful women entrepreneurs. The areas where we are really struggling and working then with our clients that we invest in terms of e-commerce providers, are that women are still largely concentrated in sectors that are less profitable. They also have fewer sales, and COVID has just absolutely eradicated, and we've seen that online and offline, a lot of the gains that were made by women entrepreneurs. And so in fact, just to bring a couple of statistics in, we've seen women entrepreneurs lose on platforms 44% of their sales compared to men of 28%. So really big differences there. But then also we looked at platforms and looked at how are women utilizing what these platforms offer their entrepreneurs. And we've seen big gaps. So women were less likely to make use of paid advertising. They were less likely to actually enshrine and sign up for the training that platform providers have been offering, because the content wasn't tailored, the timing wasn't tailored. And so there's a lot of opportunities to optimize engagement on those platforms. Couple more points to just bring to the table. One is, if we were to close the gender gap on online platforms, what we looked at was we could gain 300 billion in additional revenues by 2025. So quite a staggering amount. The majority is predicted to happen in Asia, less in Africa, because we're still, like Fadi said, a lot of digital literacy and obviously connectivity missing, and affordability is just out of the question. So huge differences between Asia and Africa, of course. But yet on the opportunity side, we know that Africa has the highest concentration of women entrepreneurs in the world, period, and very successful women entrepreneurs. So I don't want to kind of label or portray, women entrepreneurs always at the spectrum of micro. We've seen incredibly, very successful women entrepreneurs on online platforms that far supersede the micro stage. So the thing is to equalize the playing field. So how can we do it? I would say there's 4 particular areas that platform providers can take action on. First is sex disaggregate the data. Neither Jumia or Lazada had any idea necessarily who's selling on their platforms and how gender differences and social cultural norms are playing into some of the discrepancies and gaps. Second one is to provide training that's relevant for women entrepreneurs at the time and delivered in a way that's useful to them. So really that is highly localized content, and really looking not just at hard business skills, but a lot of the social fabric of skills is critical. Third one is to make sure women can take advantage of the value-added services that are on those platforms, and ask in survey and user feedbacks what those are and what are important to women. And then the last one is definitely to look at access to financing as a continuum of the contract piece, the commerce piece. So just contracts without capital are really not helpful. So working capital is absolutely critical. And looking at embedded finance as one means to achieving that is, I think, what we want to see.
Wonderful, Henrietta. Thank you so much for that. Again, lots of lessons in there. Claire, just having heard Fade and Henrietta, how important is mobile? We know obviously it's key.
Yeah, I mean, mobile is the primary way that most people access the internet, often the only way people access the internet. So it really is a key that, and that's why when we look at the data that I've been sharing, it's about looking at mobile and how we do it. So it's really important. And again, in our research, we show that women are disproportionately using it as the only way of access. So, but as I sort of mentioned, that the gender gap is persistent. So we looked at it at the start of COVID, worried about what's going to happen with COVID in terms of women's access to the internet, mobile internet. And I mean, the good news is when we looked at the data last year, the gap was still reducing, but it was only reducing in South Asia, but it was remaining stubbornly persistent in the other regions that we looked at. And we saw some worrying signs. So we saw that COVID, as Hamid and other people have mentioned, has had a big impact on women, on affordability particularly. So even when handsets and data costs are reducing, they're becoming less affordable because of the economic impact of COVID, and that's disproportionately affecting women. So, there's a lot of worries there, and we need to focus on it. But I would say that there is hope. So we know what we need to do to address this issue. We know what the barriers are. We know that tackling affordability, tackling digital skills, making sure a woman feels safe and confident to use mobile, making sure that relevant services are available, making sure that they can access them. And by addressing these barriers holistically, we can tackle it. So, we have mobile operators who've signed up to something called the Connected Women Commitment Initiative, where they've made formal commitments with targets to reduce the gender gap in their mobile internet mobile money customer base. And they made those commitments starting in 2016, and since then have reached over 40 million new women with these services, which shows that despite these challenges, despite all of these constraints, it is possible. So if we do targeted action, and I would echo what Amiet said, I think that what we need to have the data. We need to understand what the issue is, what the challenges are, who you're missing in your customer base, what their needs are and what the barriers are. We then need to take targeted, focused action. We need to have and I am a big believer in targets. It's not just about saying, let's reach women, let's have some targets, let's hold ourselves to account, let's have targets, and let's take targeted action against those, the key barriers that we see. And we also all need to work together. So I think that's another key message. I would say, this needs to be done by all stakeholders working together, but it is possible to address this if we have the data and we know where we need to focus. And we are seeing our mobile operator members making significant strides, reaching millions. So just wanted to leave with that. That is possible, but we do need to focus on it. It does need targeted focus.
Claire, thank you very much indeed. Let me bring in Angela now. I mean, how important is 5G? What is that going to mean for the future years? And probably quite different in different parts of the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think sort of everything that folks have touched on, 5G is here. It's here now for some parts of the world. It's coming out more for other parts of the world, right? And will be in the next, 2022, 23. Qualcomm essentially is building the foundational technologies in those phones, in those machines, in your car, in your home, whatever, is going to be connected. And as Claire said, we're working with mobile operators, device manufacturers, and all types of, other industries in order to get access out there. Because I do think all of the things that have been mentioned, right? Getting sex disaggregated data, getting training to women, as Fade mentioned, getting women's skills that they need. Those are all going to happen, or many of those are going to happen, right, through the internet, through mobile. And so the key here is connectivity. And 5G is going to sort of enable more connectivity. Whether it's using 5G, it's using artificial intelligence, it's going to be taking those and sort of getting access to people who currently don't have access. As I was mentioning before, there's this thing sort of fixed wireless access, which is going to help reach the last mile. And there are lots of other things that need to happen at the same time, right, that have been mentioned, affordable handsets, digital literacy skills. We're sort of working on the connectivity piece at Qualcomm. And so I think 5G is going to be one of those game changers. As Henrietta mentioned, there's a huge opportunity here once once women do get online and do have access and do have skills in terms of increased GDP or increased revenue globally. And so we're working to help make those technologies a reality. And 5G is one of those that will help women entrepreneurs, particularly, one, get connectivity, as I mentioned earlier, to run their business, to grow their business, to connect with customers, to get access to digital skills or to trainings where it's most convenient for them, as Henrietta mentioned, and get access to all kinds of services that they need. I think the earlier speaker, Regina, mentioned, also the trickle-down effect, which I'm sure has been mentioned many times over the course of the last few days, is that not only is it going to help women, but also their families. And so I think really 5G is going to be able to deliver on that promise of connectivity.
Yes, we always know that when any kind of money goes into the hands of women, it goes more towards the family than it might otherwise. Thank you so much. That's a really, really interesting opening set of questions. Fade, you're telling us a bit about how your amazing sounding business works, and it has actually, I gather, enabled other women entrepreneurs to run digital businesses. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So what Bookings Africa is, it's basically an online digital work marketplace. So as a speaker, as an influencer, as a photographer, as a chef, no matter what skill, well, I wouldn't say no matter what skill, but we have about 30 different professions that you can monetize. And so that means you can either physically get booked for a job, or you can virtually get booked using our video call feature. And that's really helped during lockdown because a lot of informal workers, especially we have a large population of youth, about 70% of the 200 million Nigerians are actually under the age of 35. So you can imagine there's a huge population that are very young. And everybody's trying to get online and trying to, do the whole TikTok and social media. So at the same time, during lockdown, they couldn't monetize themselves. So a lot of people turned to our platform to monetize their skill sets. And whether it's given a masterclass, makeup artists teaching women how to apply makeup, photographers teaching would-be content creators how to take great pictures, just using whichever smartphone device they have. So a lot of people were actually able to run their own business, and basically because you can set up your portfolio as well as your availability, and you can actually accept payment on there. So you really don't even need your own website anymore. We are basically like your own mini website or one-stop shop. So you have your own profile account there. So in that regard, and it's free for people to set up. And free to use, and we only take a very, very small commission once the client has paid and the job is done to a satisfactory level, as well as there's ratings and reviews. So for the first time, there's a one-stop shop where people can make an informed decision, and that didn't really occur before. Everybody was kind of working through word of mouth. And also for the clients booking the service providers, they were able to also rate and review and also book people based on the customer service, because customer service, don't know if you visited Nigeria or at West Africa before, but we're not the best at customer service. But now that people can see transparently what people rate you, your clients rate you a 5-star or a 1-star. And of course, everybody wants a 5-star. So we also started noticing that people started paying a lot of attention to the customer service that they were actually given. And a lot of people started asking for soft skills training in order to improve their customer service skill sets. So there was kind of a knock-on effect, because they realized that in order to really thrive in this digital work world, that they actually need more skills than just being able to cook or be a hairstylist or be a great photographer. There's a lot more skill sets that are needed in order to satisfy the client sufficiently. And that way people turned to Bookings Africa. We have about 85,000 registered users, and about 68 to 70% are women. And we operate in Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya. And it's just a great way for people to monetize their latent skill sets, as well as skills that are either learned or applied knowledge. And yeah, it's just a great way for people to monetize themselves in an efficient and secure way, where you don't have to give out your phone number, your email address, your bank account details, because all of that is already done. The technology that we have allows people to monetize themselves without giving away their personal data as well. So that also, people felt secure about doing that. And also there's the social norms and cultural traditions that we have Women might get married a lot younger here. I'm not going to lie, it's still quite patriarchal society. So women are not meant to be speaking to men or working with men, and there's a lot of barriers that we have. So now that people could deliver their skill sets and deliver their knowledge virtually, it actually opened up a whole new world of monetization and earnings for a lot of women in this economy. So we were able to contribute to that.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. Are you thinking of expanding to other countries, other continents?
Absolutely. So actually, first of all, I want to conquer Africa. We do have plans to scale to at least 20 countries across sub-Saharan Africa within the next 3 years. That is the plan. However, there's a bit more technicality issues behind that because Africa being a bit fragmented, the payment gateways means we can't pay instantly in local currencies. So if you're in Ghana and you want to pay someone in Rwanda, the currencies are completely different and the banks don't speak to each other. So then we have to use USD and it just becomes a little bit more complicated. So until it's the Africa Free Trade Agreement that's happening, and they're talking about creating a banking system called PAPS, which is the Pan-African Payment System, which means all the banks across Africa will speak to each other. And fingers crossed, if that happens, then that will enable my business to scale across a lot of countries across the continent. And then, that being said, I also recently met up with the global chair of the Latin America of Cherie Foundation called Blair. I was with her a couple of weeks ago in Mexico. And I do have plans of expanding into Latin America. Of course, it'll be completely branded something else, not Bookings Africa. However, looking at the data across Latin America, it's very similar to Africa. They have a huge number of informal workers. They have a high number of youth as well. They have a high number of people in the creative and in the informal sector that need to be formalized. And the solution, if we can crack Africa, then we can crack the rest of the world. And I've already bought a lot of domains, including Bookings Asia, Bookings a lot of, so Bookings might just pop up everywhere around the world. You never know. Give me 5 years or so. I'm working on it. But for now, there's still a lot of groundwork to be done in Africa, and especially to help close the gender gap in pay, the gender disparity with pay. Because now the women on the platform, you put up your own price. So there's no haggling. So if you think you're worth $1 or you think you're worth $100, it's completely up to you. Whatever your price that you want to put up, people can now make an informed decision. It's now up to them to sell their skills and sell the knowledge that they have by putting up an amazing portfolio so clients can make an informed decision. So that way, it's not about whether you're a guy or whether you're a man or a woman. It's literally about what skills do you have to bring to the table. And that way, it's a lot more even.
Henrietta, I want to bring you in a second, but Fade, I just wanted to quickly ask, and that's sort of both questions in a way, both linked to both of you, but it's a big question in a way, but briefly, Fade, what do you think are the key skills that women need to be taught if they're wanting to set up digital businesses from what you've seen? Can you summarize that?
And very quickly, in a nutshell, I do really think it starts off with your education level and the access to finance that you have. So if you're much lower, there's actually a lot of digital literacy and digital skills that need to be taught. If simply, what is Google? What is Android? What is Facebook? How does that work? So there's that really basic digital literacy skill sets for very, very low income. But then if you're already a middle income earner, then I believe it's actually more about the soft skill sets, where you're learning about confidence building as well as financial literacy. And I think the Road to Growth program that the Cherie Blair Foundation has, as well as the Her Venture app, are doing amazing things in terms of teaching women about financial literacy and also building the soft skill sets that they need to be able to go out in the world and be confident women, because that's 50% of what it takes to run a business, being confident that you can actually achieve it.
Fantastic, absolutely. And Henrietta, I mean, obviously there are huge challenges. Can you just tell us about some of the IFC's work in this area in terms of the training that's needed and that should be being done?
Absolutely. And maybe in the next round, Fade, I'd be also curious to see if you've seen on your platform any online aggression and bullying and sexual harassment, because obviously you can identify the gender sometimes, right? So I'm just curious, but we don't need to go into it now, but I would really love to hear from you. So what our work has been is really to look at where is the investor community going when it comes to digital businesses? And then working with the investor community and the digital providers to say, how can we close some of those key gender gaps on contracts, on finance, on many of the other issues? And so just let me give you maybe perhaps a couple of examples that bring this point home. One is we worked early days, like 4 years ago now, with Uber. And we worked with them in 6 emerging countries to really figure out who's riding, who's driving, what are the biggest barriers and opportunities for women to get engaged in increased mobility. And what we found is really very interesting. We got a lot of question marks on why you're partnering with Uber, but Uber had the market dominance at that point. And so we wanted to see who are the people who engaged on the platform, what are they making, what are the incentives, and then how can we optimize that system. We've seen that actually, for example, in Egypt, women who came onto the platform to become drivers made 29% more income than men, because women came often out of the informal sectors or didn't work at all and then utilized their driving skills to actually make a living for the first time in their lives. We've seen other countries where women came onto the platform and they made way too little for it to be worth their while. And so one thing that became very clear is with this flexible pricing and with asset ownership, right? You have to own a car. You obviously have not the equal ingredients in every locale in every country. So looking at who owns the assets, can you actually feasibly rent them? What kind of protection do you have if you have the asset that is just leased to you? And then improving women's, for example, driving skills, making sure that women get actually to drive and get to choose who their passengers are, which is making sure that you can only be with a woman, was very critical features to change in some of the core market where violence, for example, is particularly high. So that work carried on, and then we've expanded that to other local ride-sharing companies, Pick.Me in Sri Lanka, Bolt now in 6 countries, really pushing into the Africa market, and to say, how can we make sure women are safe as drivers, safe as riders, and how we can make sure that the benefits and opportunities are more equally distributed? Then we looked
at do you do that, just very briefly? How do you make them safe as drivers, for example?
Right. So what we've designed is online safety courses so that every single driver had to go through them, right? Obviously geared towards the male drivers, because sexual harassment does disproportionately obviously affect women. And then making sure you have a zero tolerance code at the policy level for the company, and really making sure that there's safety apps, also working with law enforcement, that actually when law enforcement is called, oftentimes we've seen in many countries around the world that law enforcement is part of the problem and not part of the solutions, because then there's additional violations, right? And so it's not necessarily that you're safe because you've called the police. So there's many pillars to building a safe ecosystem, some of which go way beyond the individual company. And that's the important, is you really build an ecosystem. And the funny thing was, actually, when we interviewed about 11,000 drivers and riders as part of that study, what we found is actually for women, the biggest opportunity for ride sharing was safety, because they felt safer than in public transport. But the biggest obstacle was safety as well, saying that if only those 3 things would be in place, we would feel even safer and make use of it more, was also pretty interesting. So it was that one sticky point. But then we pulled this over to the e-commerce sector, and seeing that, between the pandemic, most of our purchasing went online. And we decided, okay, let's focus on e-commerce and see what gaps we see there, which is where the work comes in with Jumia and Lazada. And now we're looking at logistics platforms, and again, seeing where women represented as part of that, and then working with the providers to close these gaps on finance. So we're investing in about 3 billion in SME credits for women entrepreneurs as IFC, together with over 100 financial institutions. We're working with our fintech community to make sure, actually, on the fintech side, which is heavily male dominated in its design and execution, making sure women can be part of that. And as Angela said, I think, or it was Claire said it, setting targets. So we have corporate scorecard targets as investors within our institution, and we ask clients to set targets for women in leadership, women in their workforce, women as suppliers, women in the community, and women as customers. Because only when you set those targets together with clients will you actually see a change in behavior. Last point I would say is investment alone is not sufficient. The technical assistance part is really critical as well, because otherwise what happens, we've seen this in the past decade, we give a credit line, for example, that is really dedicated and earmarked for women entrepreneurs, Once a dedicated credit line is spent, business operations return to the usual business. So you need to work on unconscious bias. You need to work on products and services that are really geared for women entrepreneurs. The sales and distribution channels need to be retooled. So you need to put in place a whole suite of additional components that the business can really follow through, so that your investment is really sort of long lasting in terms of its impact it has on the women that are part of the stakeholder group of that platform.
Henrietta, thank you very much indeed. And we're going over sort of similar territory, but Claire, in your view, what are the key barriers that need to be addressed now to get more digital inclusion? How are you working on those priorities?
Yeah, so I think a key barrier is just a lack of data and knowledge of the challenge and the issues, and contextually, because as we've heard from many people, a woman's experiences and the barriers are different depending on who you are, where you are. So having that data, there's such a lack of gender disaggregated data, and we just need this to inform it. So we publish every year our mobile gender gap report, which basically looks at what is the current state of play, what has happened in the last year, what are the barriers, how are they changing it. It's our sort of we're trying to help fill this gap with that information, but there needs to be a lot more. So we need to have better data, better to do informed policy making, informed practice, business practices, and where that data is available, because there's such a shortage, we see that it gets used extensively by so many stakeholders, and so I guess a call would be to sort of have better data, have more available data on this topic that we would all happily use. So we're doing a lot of work in that area, and we encourage more people to do it. And then, as I said, the barriers, key barriers are affordability through the handsets and literacy and digital skills. So, so we work with our partners and members on those. So there's a range of initiatives that we're seeing happening on those two barriers in particular. Mobile operators, for example, finding ways to have either reduce the cost of a phone or sort of financing mechanisms for phones to get them. These are initiatives that are not targeted necessarily at women, but these are initiatives that disproportionately attract women or impact women because they have concerns. So what kind of creative financing mechanisms can we put in place to enable people to be able to buy a phone? Digital skills and literacy programs, again, that reach women, as Henriette mentioned, making sure that they're relevant to them, they speak to them, that they're at the right time in the right place. So we're seeing a lot of our members delivering digital skills initiatives, and then there's, as I say, the other barriers, and we see addressing these barriers holistically really makes a difference. So making sure there's relevant content and services. Safety, again, as I said, we see that women feel that mobile makes them safer. At the same time, they have safety concerns with mobile. So there's a sort of double side to that area. And again, we're seeing our members do things like have anonymous top up for their phone, so that women don't have to reveal their phone number when they top it up, because sometimes when women do that, then the men will then harass them or call them because they've had to reveal their identity, that they're a woman, and their number. So there's a range of initiatives that we're seeing and working with our members on in that space. And so I think I would say that those are the kind of barriers we need to address, and we need to do it holistically, and we need to work with others together on it.
Claire, fantastic. Thank you so much. And bringing in Angela, sorry, you might take a long time, Angela, but obviously you're in a vast business. How do you keep the practice inclusive?
I'm happy to wait a long time because the discussion's been so great, so that's fine. I think there's a number of ways that a company like Qualcomm or big corporations certainly can help advocate for women entrepreneurs and to keep our own practice inclusive. So a few things. So first of all, we're looking at increasing our gender diversity. Of course, we're in the tech industry. Of course, lots of tech companies are struggling with gender diversity. And so we have placed a big focus on this. We've tied executive compensation to increasing diversity at Qualcomm. We have targets that we've set. And also not just bringing more women into the company, but also women in positions of leadership as well, because I think that's, of course, just as important. There's also, a company like Qualcomm has been successful because of one of the reasons, because we patent so many of our technologies. And I think helping improve diversity in patenting, focused on the US right now, but certainly globally as well, because this is an issue where there is not as much diversity as we would like to see. Women are patenting at like half the rate of men. There's lots of reasons for that. It's a very insane process. It can be quite expensive, right? So helping to make that easier to access and get more women involved in the patenting process, which will certainly help a company like Qualcomm, but will obviously help women entrepreneurs globally. And then I think there's a number of things that a company like us can do in terms of advocating for policies. So obviously talked a lot about 5G earlier. We're working with regulators and governments around the world to sort of deploy 5G networks and to get them out, right? Again, we're focused, I think 5G's here and we're trying to get it out everywhere. But also Claire mentioned, creative financing. So working with governments to advocate for things like universal service funds, if those are available in a country, to make phones more affordable for women, or to get them, more access to devices and things like that. So I think there's a number of things that corporations can do and should be doing to help bring more women into the fold, both, as entrepreneurs or within their own organizations or within the patenting world or whatever it might be.
Fantastic, Angela. Thank you so much. That's all amazing food for thought. And if any of you would like to send in some questions for our four fantastic panelists, do please send them in now. We'd love to hear from you. I think we've got about 15 minutes to run on this session. I'm just going to ask each of our guests. I'm going to start with you, Angela, just to go backwards, I guess. If in terms of the whole sort of stereotype business, I was interested to hear you say that it's still very difficult to get women into the business and to sort of promote them and keep them. And a lot of those arguments, I guess, are quite well rehearsed, but it does still feel like the world is still in massive flux because of COVID.
Sure.
Can you give me a sense of whether you think the stereotypes are breaking down, especially in the younger generations? And what are the best ways to counter those stereotypes to deliver the change that you want?
Yeah, so I definitely think we're seeing stereotypes break down. We have a number of programs at Qualcomm that are focused on STEM education. This is sort of a little bit away from women entrepreneurs, but I think, as Fade was saying, giving women those digital literacy skills or those coding skills, or getting them, access to those skills. And of course, there's a lot of research out there that it really needs to happen at a young age. So we're working with, girls as young as 4th grade in the US, which is about 9 to 10 years old. And then as well as globally, just to get them access to those skills and to keep them interested, right? Because the research shows that starts to taper off. And I think even as we're looking at, even as I'm sitting in on interviews of folks that are coming into Qualcomm, or we're looking at people that want to work at a large corporation, I think we've seen a change in that it's people are interested, especially young women, in how technology can be helpful, how it can have a social impact. What can the technology do from an environmental perspective? Is it environmentally sustainable? And all of these types of things, which I think are engaging a much more diverse workforce, which will only serve to benefit large companies, right? Because we know that more diverse workforces tend to put out better product, right? And so I do think that we have started to see a shift. I think we have a long ways to go. I'm by no means saying the problem is solved, but I think that there is this interest from younger folks to sort of make change, come in and help be part of that solution. And I'm very encouraged by it.
And just to pick you up on that, because I've got teenage boys, growing up here in the UK, they have to specialize quite early. If they don't decide that they want to massively focus on digital skills, it's amazing how quickly you can lose them, or you become totally digitally focused, and that that's the direction that you're going in. So when you see people coming into your vast company, if women have not kept up, how easy is it, if they are interested, to catch them up? And it's because it's both technical know-how and confidence, as Fade was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be difficult, and especially a company like Qualcomm, where it's a very specialized technology, because we're not a software company per se, right? So it's not just coding, it's hard computer science and hardware and tech like that. Yeah. So I think it is difficult. And I think the other thing, which is so interesting about what you said, is I think we really need a balance of skills. So people who have technical know-how, but also a humanities background, right? I think we need to look at how can we build the technology, and what are the implications of the technology that we're building, and all of those types of things. I think that's going to be a huge issue moving forward. So hopefully, we continue to give diverse education to boys and girls, right, across the spectrum, because I think it's going to be important to sort of have both of those, so that you're not just focused on building, or you're not just focused on, social impact or whatever it might be. I ended up at a tech company, and I have 2 international relations degrees. Neither of them are technical, but you know what I mean? So I got here either way, but I definitely think
when did you do your tech education then? Which part of your...
I haven't. No, I haven't. I have 2 global studies, conflict
Okay,
analysis.
when did you pick up the skills that you needed? Was it
at the State Department? Yeah. So I was working on technical issues at the State Department, right, which was important. And we were looking at things like internet freedom and digital skills, and getting civil society organizations. That was a big push of Secretary Clinton's at the time, was getting, civil society organizations, digital literacy and digital skills, which this was, 10, 12 years ago now. But yeah, I mean, I think it's good to get that balance, and hopefully we're going to continue to give young kids, kids your children's age, those skills as well.
Thank you so much. And Angela, just again, a quick question to you in terms of, is there a magic bullet that you can think of to overcome these stereotypes that are so all pervasive?
Education. I think that's the way to do it, just to continue to educate, to continue to expose. I think showing kids of all backgrounds what you can do with sort of these types of degrees, and it's not just one thing or the other. I think sort of showing the spectrum, because I think especially younger people care about how it's going to benefit the world. They're not just interested in making money or these other things. So I think just continued education and continued exposure, which we've seen, an increase of, but certainly we've got a ways to go.
Okay, let me just bring in, before we go to our other guests, one question from the audience, which is that, are any of the panelists aware of examples of how women-led digital MSMEs have been adapting or supporting the shift to a green economy? What are the opportunities and challenges here? Fade, we've just obviously had the COP summit end in Scotland here.
Mm-hmm.
The environment's been on everyone's mind, and particularly in the last fortnight. Any thoughts on that?
I actually know quite a few women-led businesses that are doing a lot of things with the recycling across West Africa, and that's how they're trying to help. They actually got a social enterprise where you recycle, and the money made from that, they actually use that to pay school fees for developing women and young girls in developing countries, and also teaching them about STEM as well. So it's a tech company for good to also teach and encourage them as well. So I like that. So I know quite a few girls and women that are doing that. And the support is they're still gathering support. It hasn't really gone mainstream, but right now people are paying attention to those kind of businesses.
And Claire, on the environment, again, any awareness of how women-led businesses can particularly adapt to the green economy?
I mean, I would just say that it's a key issue, and certainly the mobile industry has made major commitments in this space to try and address this issue. I would say I'm not the expert on enterprises and women enterprises, what they do, but maybe some of the other panelists would better speak about specific examples of enterprises, other than to just acknowledge this is a very significant issue that we all need to be thinking about.
Yes, and Henrietta, any thoughts on this one before we come back to the stereotypes, more general question, but on the green economy front?
Yeah, so we've seen actually a higher concentration of women running social enterprises focused on climate compared to men. We've also seen a lot of women entrepreneurs being engaged in the supply chain of, for example, the renewable energy sector. And so with IFC, we have actually a whole initiative in West Africa called Energy to Equal, to make sure that women entrepreneurs in the renewable energy sectors can succeed, as well as women employees. And so that's an ongoing initiative which includes about 15 of the largest employers and companies, to really make sure that women entrepreneurs have the access, the capacity, the community connections, the contract, the confidence to excel in that sector. I think we know very little in terms of data. So in fact, actually, the International Finance Corporation is currently undertaking a study of women entrepreneurs in the green sector and also in the blue economy. So we've seen in the fisheries industries, of course, for example, the majority of employees are women in often very hazardous and really difficult circumstances. And so there's a lot, I think, to yet be done to make sure that women are definitely designers of climate change solutions and at the forefront in the leadership of climate change. One poll that you might be interested in looking up that the Women's Forum conducted just ahead of COP was really interesting to see, even as an individual on the decision-making level on how to adjust your own household economy and become more climate friendly. Women seem to be somewhat outperforming our male counterparts with, for example, 59% of women recycling compared to just 51% men. So there's a lot of defector.
And Henrietta, just very quickly, just coming back to the stereotype question that I asked Angela already, can you say in a nutshell, is there anything that, governments, that, that companies can do to encourage more women to run these digital businesses? Because there's been a lot of talking for a long time.
I know. Just one word, it's care. It's a topic we haven't discussed about at all, but social cultural norm change needs to happen at the care level. We need to expect men to be equal contributors to the care at home, not just kids, the full care spectrum, and vice versa. We need to expect women to be able to make the choice for full-time paid employment if that's what they want to do. As long
how do you
as we
do
don't
that?
have public...
How do you make men take a fair share in caring for parents, caring for children, and taking the career hit that often comes with that?
So I think incentives at the employers can really help and shift that model. So for example, parental leave can allow it, and really making it very specific to say it's lose or use, right? So it's not, you can't just shift it off. So I think there's a couple of things employers can do. Employers can provide childcare support. We've done a big report, you might want to look into it, measuring the business case for providing working parents with childcare support as a company. What are the retention benefits, the productivity benefits, and so on and so forth. And then really making the economical argument and saying, and we've seen that in Turkey, where we've worked with a blue-collar car manufacturing, mostly men, on providing childcare support. And actually men were as interested as women in that company to get women to allow to engage in paid activities. So sometimes it's like we're also not expecting enough from male employees. And in fact, when you ask them what type of childcare support would you prefer, actually they come out with fantastic contributions in terms of ideas. So I think not discredit that actually men think about care quite a bit, and asking them to become involved is helpful.
Yeah,
that would be my answer.
Thank you. It's very much. It is changing. Fade, you referred to how things are in the regions that you're working in. Any magic bullets? I mean, there's lots of ideas that obviously, and different governments, different societies have their own.
I think I love the data that I recently read from Norway, a report that I read about Norway, that it's actually in policy, from parliament to even boardrooms, you have to have a certain amount of women in place. And I think if we could adopt that globally, you're definitely going to start to see an immediate shift in the participation of women across the board, whether it's from government, so all stakeholders, whether it's policymakers, whether it's private practitioners, whether it's development practitioners, whatever it is, as long as you have a bit more equality and there's a policy to encourage that, from education all the way to the workplace, all the way to government, I think that's a way to at least start to quickly shift that balance, this current imbalance that we have.
So you make it illegal, basically, to not have the right balance. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. In Norway, I think to set up a company, you have to have a certain amount of women on your board. So if you have, let's say, board members, four of you, 50% have to be women. I can't remember the exact data, but it's something along the lines of 50%, as well as in parliament as well. So there's going to be a lot of representation. And as soon as that was into policy, you found that a lot of businesses began to thrive a lot more in Norway. And I just thought, this might be an interesting practice. It might be a case study that we should look at to see if government were able to implement this policy across board, to say you need to have X amount of employees that are women in your business. You need to have X amount of women that are board members. You need to have X amount of women in the parliament or in government. I want to see how that shift would actually, from an economic standpoint, how that actually affects, and also cultural standpoint, how that starts to affect society.
That's very interesting, the idea of it going through global parliaments. I'm going to investigate that further. Claire, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I guess I have two thoughts. One is, I mean, I think we need to, as I sort of mentioned earlier, we need to measure the issue. If we don't understand the issue and have targets to address it, if you look at, like in the UK, when governments would require people to measure the gender pay gap, it made a difference, and report on it. So I think we need to measure and understand this issue and then have targets to address it. But I also think we need to not forget that women are not a homogeneous group, and that their barriers that they face are, vary drastically. So I think what we need to do is really understand the different barriers and needs and preferences that women have in different contexts, and then really work to address them. So it really has to be grounded in that understanding. So I guess having a strong understanding of the issue and what women, the challenges, and then having some targeted action to address it is really important.
I think we are just about out of time on this session. I know on this sort of final one, how we change society, so much has been said, and it's been very interesting here in the UK. Just in the last few days, a member of the Bank of England has talked about the risks of women being on a twin track path if they work from home as an employee and not being paid or promoted as much. That's the danger if they're not in the office. The whole idea of presenteeism. All these debates are going to evolve probably quite fast, I suspect, and they are global. And it'll be really interesting to see how even the next 6 months changes. All these debates, but certainly there's a lot of opportunity. We've seen some fantastic ideas, some fantastic success stories, but there's obviously a long way to go. We're going to wrap this session up. Thank you so much to all our guests today: Angela Baker, Claire Sibthorpe, Henrietta Kolb, and Fadeo Ogunru. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It's been really fascinating to hear from you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gita.
Thank you, Gita.
Thank you.